While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Hey, welcome to the iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. And we're reaching out to you, the 50 million Christ followers who are already in retirement or on their way to retirement. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and I'm joined by the host of the host and the hostess from the mostest of the Retirement Reformation. These guys have got it all, Bruce and Judy Brinesman. Of course, today Martha's also joining us in studio. And so it's great. We got our wives with us as we're having this conversation about the impact of culture on retirement. But Judy, before we get into our conversation about what's biblical about retirement, you had something you really wanted to speak to the audience today.
One thing I realize, now that I'm 81 years old, is that my life can change in an instant. In my case, I have learned to more and more deeply love my husband. He is my rock. I understand, though, that at any time he can go. Something can happen. And my life will be as a single person or as a caretaker person, and I have to be prepared for that. And I think that that's one of the things that hasn't hit me until I got older and I see what happens to my friends. And I have to be very conscious of that.
I think Judy really hits on an important point, and the point is a couple of pieces to it. First piece is that retirement has at least 3 stages. It's not all one homogeneous period. It's not as the world would project it to us. It is those 3 stages. And in those 3 stages, that first one is activity, and that's what your concern is. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's activity. That second stage that starts in probably that next 10 years is much more mentoring and concerned about my physical health. And so physical health, and that's what Judy is referring to when she hit 80 and 81 and I just hit 80, those concerns about physical health start to show up and become much more real. When you take that next step into the next stage, when you're in your late 80s and 90s, then it's more about mental health. And so you've got activity, you've got physical health, and you've got mental health. And that progression, and I think Judy is reflecting that. I also read an interesting study that said that the closer we get to 100, the closer we get to death, the easier it is to think about it and talk about it, and the more we are willing to do that. In our 50s and 60s and 70s, you want to avoid that because now it's going to be this great time of freedom and activity. But as you continue to mature, those realities become much more in your face. And so I think Judy's reflecting that in what she's saying. But again, that first stage, activity, that next stage, physical health, and that last stage, mental health.
You guys bring up a great conversation. It's the reality is we're all going to die.
Yes.
That's the one guarantee in life. We got taxes and death. Well, but the taxes aren't going away either. So how do we embrace death yet not have it cloud every day? Because that's really, we all know we're facing it. But how do we make sure we're running a life with meaning in our retirement years, as we know that death is inevitable, but death is also, death is just inevitable. You could die we live in Florida. You could die in a car crash in Florida. You're just as likely to die in a car crash as you are to die from old age. So how do we just embrace it, but not have it cloud us? Martha, what's your perspective on this?
Well, I think that it would be great if more people at our age would have that perspective of what it would feel like to wake up at 80, and say, you know what, things could change tomorrow. Like you said, Judy, what a better way to approach each day if you approached it as though I got to live it to the fullest. And what does God want for me to do today? Not what can I get off of my bucket list, or what can I do to fulfill pleasure, or whatever that might be, but rather, what does God have for me today? If today were my last day, what would I do for God? And have that perspective even so much earlier, so that we really live that way, and be able to feel good about that at the end.
So, Bruce, this idea of the Western idea of retirement, it's really a Western idea of retirement, because when you look at
Totally.
Middle Eastern cultures, it is not the same. Where did this all come from?
Well, this all came from in the middle 1800s in Germany. They had a problem, is they had too many young people and not enough old people were leaving their jobs, so they had a job problem. And so Bismarck came up with this brilliant idea of if we could have a time when in fact you needed to retire, it would open up the jobs for the young people. That was the beginning of the culture. We see, if we jump all the way to 1936 and we go with the opening of Social Security.
Right.
Well, in 1936, when they put Social Security in place, you could begin to draw your full Social Security at 65, but the life expectancy was only 61 or 62. So the math of that was pretty easy.
Right.
But it's because of those financial questions that now, when most people think about retirement, the first thing they think about is money. And the issues that we're talking about are so much more important.
All right. So, is retirement a biblical idea?
It is not. Here's when I do seminars, I'll ask the audience, why are you still here? And there's always this dead silence, and kind of husbands and wives kind of looking at each other and saying, oh, what should I say? What should I say? And the answer is a very simple one. Because God isn't through with you yet. If he was through with you, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
But he has something more for you to do, and that's the entrance into the conversation about meaning and purpose and relationship and future.
I think it's amazing that we don't have a biblical perspective on retirement. The only mention of retirement, and I've studied this because I remember somebody questioning me this 15 years ago when I was in my early 40s. Retirement. And I'm like, I don't remember. I've read the Bible. I don't remember reading about it. But I did find one instance where it talks about the Levitical priests had to retire at 50.
True.
Their jobs were from 25 to 50, but they were butchers. They were slinging cattle and goats and whatever was being sacrificed, bulls and all that stuff, onto they're slicing, dicing, cleaning them out, skinning them up, and then they're throwing them out. I mean, they were butchers, which is pretty, it's pretty intense stuff.
Hard work.
Hard work. But when they were retired at 50, they weren't like done. They were now training up the next generation. And so, Judy, with that kind of perspective, what do you really think the biblical perspective is on retirement?
God wants us to be useful for him for our whole lives. That's the bottom line. And how we are useful continually changes, and we have to recognize that, look for new opportunities, give up the old, and just keep moving forward. I don't know why that made me think of it at this moment, but we did mention family relationships in an earlier segment. Family relationships change as your kids mature and their children mature. And to be locked into those days, in our case, when our grandsons were tiny and we were the we were the epitome of happiness. Is when we came in, we'd play with them, whatever they wanted to do. We had presents. Now, they're into athletics and sports, and we're not as important. And we have to be ready to go with the flow in that way and appreciate what we do have and what is there for us, that wasn't there before.
When we come back, I can see that Bruce is absolutely bursting, wanted to say something, but we got to take a break. You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Check us out online, retirementreformation.org. We'll be right back.
Membership has its privileges. And with the Retirement Reformation, it's true. We have 3 levels of membership to access our growing wealth of resources. We also provide discipleship and training to bring the Retirement Reformation alive in your life. So join us. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the Membership tab. Choose the level of membership that will help you rethink, retool, reframe, and reform your retirement today. The basic level is free, so you can get started today. Take the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. retirementreformation.org. Let's get back to more I Retire for Him.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. Today we're going to talk in our middle segment with Francis Gregory Pasch, an author and a longtime friend. In fact, she's my cousin. She has done so many incredible things, and her story in retirement is one I wanted you guys all to hear, and so I begged her to join us on the show today. Cousin Francis, how are you today?
I'm excellent. Very happy.
I'm so glad you're willing to share your story. How long have you been retired?
Well, I guess I never really retired. I first was a stay-at-home mom for a long time with 5 boys, and then only once in the 1970s I went out for a part-time job for 4 years. And after that, I got involved with couponing and refunding and writing for a local paper. And so I never stopped. But the most exciting part of my testimony is that my son Brian came home one day and threw a question at me that I was shocked. I didn't really have the answer. He asked, Mom, why didn't you ever tell us that we could have a personal relationship with Jesus? And why did you never tell us that we could know our eternal destination would be secure? And I was like, oh, well, you went to church every Sunday. He was a teenager then. We went to church every Sunday. He all of the boys made their communion and confirmation, but I had never read the Bible, and I loved God, but he seemed distant. So I didn't really know how much he really cared and what he wanted to do in my life. But Brian intrigued me. I started going to Bible study, and then I went to his church and my church. And then God just kept opening doors. I met another friend who said, I'm kind of born again. And I said, so am I. And we got in another Bible study, and it was great. It came at a perfect time when things were going on in our family. And so I learned that God really was faithful in showing me who he was, as I was just starting this path. And I can't figure out exactly how it all happened, except that I started writing poetry. And I never read a lot of poetry, and I never had, written anything, especially religious. And the words came. And back in 1985, my church started publishing my poems in the weekly bulletin. And then I was really excited, but I didn't have writer friends. And out of the blue one day, the Lord sent a postcard. And the postcard said there was a writers group in the next town.
So, okay, but those are before you got to retirement years, but you didn't even publish a book until you were older than 65, right? I mean, your first published poetry book was after you were 65, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, the first book I was 80, and the second one just came out when I turned 87.
I got it right here. This one just came out this year. It's amazing. I mean, I remember growing up at Christmas time, you always wrote a Christmas poem, and they were always very deep and very powerful. I'm like, wow, I wish I could have a gift like that. So how has God been using you during your retirement years? I mean, you've been writing poetry. How have you seen God use that poetry to minister to the masses?
Well, actually, when I found a writers group in 1991, I went and thought, this is good. They were teaching how to get published. And I was new at it, but I felt, like you said, I wanted to reach out. So I was only in the club 6 months when someone said the leaders were leaving, Francis should lead the group. So actually, it's 30 years. I started that group, and wherever I lived, we learned together how to write devotions, went to writers' conferences, and through all that, God opened doors and let me also, as I got published, teach others how to do that. So the exciting thing is, and I like to encourage people, it's great to have a book, but I reached out to many more people through writing for Sunday school papers and Christian magazines. And, the book will reach out a lot. But some of the devotional magazines, for anybody who's listening, sometimes my devotions went out to 125,000 people.
Wow.
So anybody can, maybe not everybody writes, but they can all reach out in some way to help other people.
Well, and so you in your retirement years, you've been a mentor. You've been a discipler.
Right.
You've been writing devotions. You've been helping encourage other people to encourage their writing gift, which it is not for everybody. If you read my stuff, I need lots of editing help. You actually just can write stuff and it just flows from your heart. It's work for me. Francis, when you look at retirement, growing up, retirement, I knew your folks very, very well. I loved your folks. What was your biblical understanding of retirement before you became, what was your understanding of retirement before you became a believer, and your understanding of retirement today as a biblical Jesus follower?
Well, actually, I just figured retirement would be when whatever I was doing, even though I wasn't working, that when those years when the kids grew up and things slowed down, that it would be time where you just relaxed and you found things to do, maybe travel. But in my case, I guess I never retired. God kept opening doors. And so biblically, I believe, just reading the stories of Moses and the different people who, God used in their later years, I just figured that if God used those people, if he wanted me to use me, then I was open to do whatever he wanted, because I had never looked at it from a biblical standpoint, because I really never started reading the Bible or going to Bible studies until I was 50. So now the first half of my life was not really as involved, even though I went to church and I love God. It changed.
I didn't realize that you had something in common with Moses. So he didn't get his first real job till he was 80, and you didn't get published till you're 80. So that's something. And really, that was part of his job. I mean, Moses did a lot of writing. I mean, Moses has got a leg up on you. His 5 books were published. They've been published a lot more than yours. So but you're both authors. I never realized that. So what have you learned about yourself because of God using you in your retirement? What have you learned about Francis Gregory Pasch during these retirement years about how God created you?
Well, it was exciting for me to realize how much he loved me even before I really knew him in a personal way. And now with knowing that, he loves me and I love him, and he's number one on my list, I feel like now every day that I get up, I'm blessed, and that I feel like he has a reason that I'm still alive. And I just want to make sure that everything I've written all these years, I give him the glory for it, because I never learned, through school or whatever, how to do this. And it is a gift. And I enjoyed, like you said, writing for probably almost, 15, 20 years, I sent out like 300 cards with my poetry. And I do also reach out for anybody else that might like to do it. I reach out with devotion on email, and that goes to over like 300
Yeah.
people.
Every couple of weeks, you send out a new devotional. It's wonderful to get those shared with us. All right. So for those listening who are preparing for retirement, those listening to iRetire4Him that aren't yet retired, but they're preparing for retirement, what kind of encouragement do you have for them about what they can look forward to in retirement?
Well, I think probably having God in their life would be the key to finding, what the Lord would like you to do. But I think that when you're retiring, instead of feeling sorry for yourself or saying, I'm too old, and, I think you should just look at what assets you have and just think of what you could do. And many people, I know people who love cooking for people or visiting people, going to nursing homes or whatever. So to say that you don't have anything to do is not right. But I love what God, I've learned through the Bible, is you don't have to be qualified. In fact, God takes a lot of people, the apostles and everyone, that were not qualified, in the world's eyes, and then he can qualify them. So I feel like that's what happened to me. I was not looking to do all this, so God just blessed me, and I'm just doing what he wants me to do.
Yeah, I think the quote you're talking about is, God rarely calls the qualified, but he often qualifies the called. Francis Gregory Pasch, how do people get a hold of your book? Where do they find it, your book of poetry?
That one is available on Amazon.
Okay.
And I do have, and I don't know whether you can see on this end,
So
this is my first book,
Right.
Double Vision,
Right.
which is seeing God in everyday life through devotions and poetry. And this you can also find in bookstores if they are,
those
it
are
was
harder.
published-
Bookstores are harder to find than Amazon, but Greater Than Gold, poems that celebrate a relationship with God. That is your latest one, published at 87 years old. Francis Gregory Pasch, thank you so much for being on iRetire4Him today, for sharing just a little bit of your story, and for being a great example within our family of somebody who loves the Lord and is running the race to the very last day. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. We'll be right back with more with Bruce Brynsma and myself. Hang on.
The Retirement Reformation website, online at retirementreformation.org, has a growing number of resources designed to help you in what may be the most productive part of your life journey. Let the door open into your last third of life with meaning and purpose, which leads to freedom and joy. Set the loneliness aside and experience the encouragement and support you need through online courses, support groups, books, prayer guides, life direction studies, and webinars, all designed to help find the new direction already planned for you. God does have a plan. Let us help you discover what it is. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org and check out our resources tab. Now back to more I Retire for Him.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him. Bruce, every second segment of the show, it's always so fun hearing those stories. But at the end of the first segment, you were about ready to burst with something you wanted to say based on something that Judy had said. What do you got inside?
Well, Judy was talking about the changes that come, and I had 2 points that I was really bursting to get out. One is that retirement is complex. Our culture says, "Oh no, it's easy, it's simple, it's just all you." No, it's not. It is complex, and one of those complexities, playing off what Judy is saying, is that there may be as much as 5 generations alive at the same time. We haven't had the complexity of those intergenerational relationships and the changes as we grow older since Methuselah, for Pete's sake. And so,
Well, maybe Abraham, but okay.
well, I'm going to hang with Methuselah. I like the 996. But those 5 generations add complexity and changes. And if picking up on Martha, what you talked about before, that idea of knowing what's coming and being able to plan for it is a better way to live than having to go through a struggle of understanding something new, and it's always a surprise.
So let's talk about what we've been observing. Martha and you and I live in a quote unquote retirement neighborhood. Most of our neighbors are retired. What are we seeing? Are we seeing our neighbors thriving in retirement, or are they struggling?
You know, what I see is a lot of them looking for whatever it is. They're enjoying what they're doing. We live in a community that has a lot of activities and things that people can do. But for instance, we have a neighbor right down the street who just recently started a new group welcoming people to the community. And what I observe is that we want relationship and we want something deeper.
Yes.
We want people to feel like they belong. We want to feel like we have purpose. So, you know, she started a new community or a group, you know, within the community. And so it gave her purpose, and it's helping other people to build deeper relationships. And so I think one of the things I'm seeing is people looking and saying, where can I find some purpose, find some meaning, and grow some relationships? And, you know, it's even been a bigger challenge just because we've had more reasons that we can't always be together.
And you know, one of the things that shocks me, so a lot of times, Bruce and Judy, you guys have seen this in your lifetime. You've seen the migration of people. When they retire, they migrate to Arizona, Texas, or Florida. They moved to the South. What we're seeing and what I've observed is that that's really neat for them. You know, when their kids are busy with their kids and they get away, but then when they start to get to your guys' age, 80, in their 80s, they're like, I can't move around as much as I could anymore. I'm 1,200, 1,500 miles away from my kids. What do I do now? Because I kind of like to move back, but they're stuck in the South. I mean, there's this angst where I'm away from my family and I'm starting to need some help. But if you live in a neighborhood full of retired people, there's very few people that can help, you know, lift things, put things up on a shelf, get things down, change the battery in the ridiculous smoke detectors every year. You know, I mean, because after a while, you know, I've seen it in both Martha's parents and my parents. You just shouldn't be on a ladder after a certain period of time. It's different for everybody, but that we're distant. We've created this big distance because we said, you retirees, why don't you guys go off? We got this real world stuff going on. Do you guys see your friends struggling with that? Hey, we're so distant from our kids. Now we want to get a little closer to our kids.
Interestingly enough, there's a lot of people that live in Colorado Springs, which is where we live, who, you know, came through with the military and decided they wanted to retire there. I know 7 families right now that are moving from Colorado Springs, one to Illinois, one to Montana, one to Iowa, one to be back with their family. So that's one thing that we're seeing that does happen in those stages. Second thing we're seeing that's happening in our retirement planning business is that we're seeing that people are choosing not to come to the southern states, but to go to a small town, which is a suburb of a bigger town, where in fact they can have interrelationships with people of all ages. It's absolutely fascinating. So that there are retirement boom towns in these small towns in Missouri and in Midwest states where people are either moving to or moving back to. So we're in a period of change, Jim.
Judy, what are you seeing in your friends?
What am I seeing in my friends? I see movement. I see moving close to family. I see, well, Colorado Springs is unique because a lot of people our age are having to leave because of the thin air and the high altitude and the struggles that they have in a life that they've built for themselves there and having to leave it. And so that's one thing that people are definitely starting to realize that retirement can go on for a long time.
And that family is so important. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's nice to be on vacation for a week, maybe not a decade, but then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, but I'm missing my kids growing up and my grandkids growing up, and they're seeing it. What are you seeing,
You know,
Martha?
I just was thinking about something. It's a little bit unique that people that actually live in Florida, like this is their home, they've, you know, grown up here. I'm starting to see some of our peers that are doing the opposite. They're finding a second home near the kids. So this has already been their home, and you know, the winters are good here. but they're finding a way to be near the kids when they can. So kind of the reverse snowbird thing. And it's just interesting. But I think the bottom line is that finding value in those relationships. And God has given length of life to this generation right now that wasn't foreseen back. You were talking about Social Security, and I know my dad talks about that. He's way outlived what his life expectancy was supposed to be according to when they were born. And with that in mind, what can all the things that the kingdom can accomplish with that amount of people that don't have the requirements for financial busyness, but can use their time in a way to be engaged with the people around them, whatever that might be, whether it's peers or the next generation. It's not all one or the other.
So let's end the conversation with this question. Bruce, since the idea of retirement is not biblical, how can retirees be a blessing to our country?
We are called to be faithful for a lifetime. So as we understand that, what lifetime means now, so how are we to be faithful to God's commands, to be able to represent Jesus in what we're doing? And I talked before about, find a need and fill it. Find someone who's lonely and be their friend. Those are the things that we can do. I also want to add one other piece. We always talk about, we're moving to where our kids are. In fact, I see lots of 60-year-olds moving to where their parents are.
Mm.
And so is the reverse twist to that.
Yes.
You guys are an example of that.
Exactly.
And so we're seeing this movement in all these different ways. And again, the key is having a relationship with God and his commands, which are love your neighbor, look outward, and represent him.
Right. Judy, you want to add anything to that? How do you think, as a retired woman, how can you be a blessing to your country?
Well, I try to be a blessing in any way I can think of. I preach to my friends and to people I know the how we can have a life of meaning in retirement, which I've certainly gotten from Bruce, and which I realize is so important because of the length of those years. So I just preach that. I remind my friends that have to leave Colorado because of the altitude, and it does happen. I mean, those are dramatic changes.
We've gone from here
in life
and driven to see you guys there, and you go from 10 feet above sea level to 5,800. You guys are at 5,800?
We're 74.
7350.
What's another 1,000 feet between friends? And it was hard for us to adjust going up, and we've got younger lungs. I think I love your point. It's that, okay, but even though they're having to move, they still can go where they're going and make an impact where they're going.
Yes, absolutely. And you can, you get put in these circumstances that you don't expect when you're a child and thinking how it's going to be. In our case, we have a special needs son. And so he will always be dependent on us. Or he'll always have to be dependent on someone. Let's leave it that way. But we have had to make decisions all along the way that affect his life and ours, and learning to work together on that. Just an example, as far as I knew, people that had special needs people or special needs children kept them with them their whole lives. Bruce said to me when Brent turned where he could no longer get any public education and all that, Brent is not going to live with us. It's not good for him, and it's not good for us. And I thought, oh my goodness. But he has had the best life. We have worked hard to find the best places for him, but he thrives. In the place that he's been.
And there's a lot of people listening that have Down syndrome kids and have had special needs kids, and they've had to make those choices. But what's cool is that every one of us has a different life. Everyone has a different perspective, but every one of us can be a blessing to those around us in our retirement. Mm-hmm. There are people around us that have needs that are living in hopelessness, that are living lost, that desperately need to know who we know. And what a great conversation today. Really appreciate you guys all sharing from your hearts. It's fantastic. Bruce, as always, we want to invite people to join us on retirementreformation.org because out there, you can help people find that purpose. And we also want to challenge people, you mentioned it a little earlier, get a copy of iRetire4Him, which will one day be for sale right on Retirement Reformation's website, because there we just give some practical, tactical ways for people to put their feet into action in retirement. You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, guest host, Martha Brangenberg, and the founders of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce and Judy Brynsma. We're Christ followers, journeying from retirement to reformation, because we ultimately just want to say this one phrase: I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Brynsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.